And with that, Michael, welcome very much to Nova Scribes. It's great to have you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Brian. Delighted to be with you this evening and welcome. It's a little bit much for me to claim the whole of the Northern Ireland peace process, but I was lucky enough to be part of a group from this company, Interaction Associates, and its not-for-profit wing called the Interaction Institute for Social Change, that went to Northern Ireland in 1996 and 1997 and ended up preceding the peace process and bringing some of these tools to the northern part of my country. Clearly, I come to you with an accent. It's an Irish accent. It comes originally from Dublin. I came here in 1995 to study for 1 year at a local university in the Boston area. And like a lot of people from my country, I stayed. Legally, I always added even before the current era. And I met a beautiful woman from Kansas, from Clay Center, Kansas, way out in the middle of the country. And I might tell you more about that later if you're good. But I am living in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I stumbled on this organization, Interaction Associates, in 1996 when I was deciding to stay. And I had been doing facilitation in Ireland for about 10 years, mostly influenced by Paulo Freire and his thinking of how you bring adults together. And what I'm hoping to do tonight, at least, is to introduce you to something that's core to Interaction Associates, and that is under the umbrella of facilitative leadership. How do you get groups to get better at making decisions? I'm going to use a PowerPoint just by way of help. There is a little thing in the that's addressed to you in the chat that Brian was good enough to put in there. That is a little guide. I'd like you to download it. I'd like you to this is all built around your case. So be thinking, what's something that I want to involve other people in decisions, and have a go at something that you haven't yet decided, if you can, that has stakeholders, and that you're thinking, how might I do this? I was lucky enough recently to meet virtually with Rachel Thompson, who's a founder of Daring Studios and a member of the Nova Scribes, and she spoke so glowingly of Nova Scribes on a podcast. And she spoke so well that I'm so thrilled to meet you. She spoke about the art of visual facilitation. It is something that we have. We believe that David Strauss and Michael Doyle, because they were architects, discovered at least, or promoted the idea of butcher paper. Promoted the idea that you could, if you develop the group memory, everything would be better. And so last week I was in DC doing a training, and I did not use any PowerPoint in person, of course. I used paper, and we use charts, generally speaking. So we're co-workers in this field, it seems to me. So I'm going to bring these up. I'm so happy to see Paul in action tonight. And so, Paul, thank you for doing this. It really is an extraordinary gift. So let me invite you. So essentially, we have a product which is a 3-day invitation called Facilitative Leadership. We do it online as well now, but it's under the umbrella of tapping the power of collaborative action. And we suggest that there's 7 practices that a leader who is choosing to be facilitative can bring as part of their repertoire. They are named as sharing an inspiring vision, focusing and measuring results, process, and relationship, designing pathways to action, coaching for performance, celebrating accomplishment, and facilitating agreement. And our focus tonight is the seventh practice, and we call it seeking maximum appropriate involvement. And so with a focus on your case, we're going to walk away in an hour and 20 minutes time you'll get an opportunity to choose a real situation that requires you to consider the decision-making process and think through who are the stakeholders. You're going to get a chance to look under the bonnet of how will you involve them, having weighed some critical factors, and then how will you even plan to communicate the level of involvement in that decision. You'll get an opportunity to share your case and receive feedback from another NOVA Scribe participant leader. Let me just check if that's something, is any question for clarification on what we're setting out to do. You can talk to me in chat. If I miss your hand going up, Brian will catch me and Brian will catch you. So seeking maximum appropriate involvement is one of these 7 practices. A practice is something you get better at if you do it over again. A practice is also, I would say, I broke my ankle in my own bedroom 5 years ago, before COVID. And ironically, I went to the walk-in clinic at Mount Auburn Hospital on Saturday morning. And they did something for me on Saturday morning, and they said, you've got to come back to meet the guy who has a practice in ankles. And so my belief is that as a leader, you have a practice. And sometimes we are the last to know. Everyone else knows you have a practice. So it's time for us to embrace. One of the ways we understand our practice is helping people to be involved in the decisions that affect their lives and their work lives in particular. So facilitated leaders make a conscious choice about when and how people can best participate. If you open your little participant guide, please, most of what I'm saying here is available, but there's a little bit of a dilemma, and this is on page 2 of your guide. If you involve people in decision-making, there's pluses and there's minuses. So maybe in chat, give me an indication, what are some of the pluses of involving people in decision-making? What are some pluses that you can think of that? Thank you very much. So Casey, you say shared ownership, engagement, Kimberly, commitment. Yeah, say a bit more about that, Kimberly, please. You might have to come off mute.
Yep. So yeah, if they are a part of being heard in the decision-making process, and even I think understanding of, I gave my feedback, even if the choice or the decision was not what I was advocating for, I can commit to it because at least I know I was heard and respected.
Yeah, as long as I know very often that my opinion has not only been sought, but it's been heard. And that's where the graphic design comes in, I think, where you're able to see that your thought got on the wall. Is sometimes, it's almost enough for me sometimes. I can let go of my thought or my idea and move towards a we or an us or an ours. In other words, I can shift from a me and a mine and to an us and an ours. Being heard, being seen, being listened to. Thank you, Casey. Wow. Shared decision, says Bruce. Beautiful. Now, so this is on one side, there's all these pluses. Think about what's the downside or the minus of involving people in decisions. If you are leading the process, what might be it's time consuming. Yes, time takes time. It may even slow it down, as Casey is suggesting there. You might get too many ideas. A wide divergence, says Amanda. Tell us a bit more about that, Amanda. Just come off mute and say it to us, please.
Well, the more you ask people for ideas, and especially if you have people that their natural bent is ideation, it can just go super wide. If there's no guardrails, if there's no context, yeah, you can just get anything from the cat to a space shuttle.
Yes, and like not everyone can cope with that avalanche of ideas. You might dissolve to having to get 100% agreement on the decision. Okay, we're going to come back to that, Kimberly, but say a little bit more about that. It might dissolve to having to get 100% agreement on the decision. It's a risk for sure. Say a bit more about that.
Yeah, sorry, my cat is playing with my mouse pad, so I was having trouble getting off of mute. So yeah, if I'm involved in it, then I'm assuming, or the group might feel like, well, we have to all agree. We have to create % agreement, when in fact, if you don't actually define the decision-making process and who is ultimately making the decision, they could feel misled.
Okay, very good. I do believe so we're saying there's benefits and risks to whatever level of involvement you choose. And we're suggesting that at the same time, I'm accountable for the results very often. And so my interest, so how do I increase involvement without losing control? What might I be afraid of losing control of? I might be afraid of losing control of the result. I might be afraid of losing control of how we get there, or the process. I might be even afraid of losing control of myself. It's a tension-raising moment when I invite people in. It just can cause a drain of energy. Yeah, can cause clarity balances control. Casey Creech, tell us a little bit. Clarity balances control. Say what you mean there.
I think there's a fair thing here, is that to let go of control, you got to be really clear in what you want. And sometimes people, when someone tries to over control a team, they don't trust the competence, and they really haven't been clear. And that can often lead to chaos or frustration in the team.
Very, very clear. Very good. I think so. The way to overcome this dilemma of the leader, which is how do I increase involvement without losing control, or is to increase the level of involvement, to seek the maximum involvement appropriate to the situation. And this is on page 5 of your text. Involvement begins with defining which decisions need to be made, and then who should participate in making those decisions. What is the decision? But first, what precedes that in some ways is, what is the situation in which there are sometimes many decisions? So open up your booklet, please, on page 5. And I think there's a writable PDF place in there where you can actually do part A of your own case. So my invitation to you is, think of a situation or describe a situation that requires you to make some decisions which will impact other folk. An example here is customer orders have now taken 2 times longer to fill than this time last year. Mythical example. And then within that situation or that context, which there may be many decisions, just choose one decision that you are invested in making that's related to that situation. In case of this mythical case, for example, whether or not to take corrective action. So just take a moment of silence to think through what's one situation, what's a situation in which I want to get people involved. And it'll impact others. Now, within that, think of one decision. Try and put that you're into chat, just to give us a flavor of what you're coming up with. What's your situation, and what's one decision that you're prepared to say out loud? Let's take get a few examples. I really do love the chat feature in Zoom for this reason, that it allows the introverts, the introverted thinkers, as opposed to the extroverted thinkers, it gives them time to speak without talking. And it's a beautiful feature, it seems to me. And it kind of balances back sometimes where we sometimes favor the extroverted thinkers who find out what they're thinking by talking, which of course is terribly annoying to the introverts who cannot understand how I have to be the victim of this person literally finding out what they're talking. So we've got some, let me hear from, how do I best back down from my project lead role, says Casey, and ramp up my role as a facilitator when there's not a defined role. Say a bit more about that, Casey. It seems a fantastic case. Go on.
It's over the last couple of years inside the company, I've been kind of creating a role as a lead facilitator inside the company. It's not a defined role anymore inside the company I work for.
Yeah.
And slowly but gradually, I'm getting more and more requests. So at some point, I got to figure out, do I focus on my senior lead as a project lead, or do I just dump that and go dive full into the role as facilitator? So I've been dipping my toe over the last couple of years.
Terrific.
And it's going well. So the question for me is, how do I define that role?
Excellent, excellent. Amanda, you've tell us a little bit about your case, please.
This is going to go on YouTube.
Well, it's a delicate. I think the audience is going to be huge. Yes.
Yeah. So let's just say they are a group of leaders in a business unit, and they need to decide on the priorities for the quarter. And I would like to be able to help facilitate their strategic planning.
Yeah.
Very good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So they come with some set ideas like big rocks or whatever that is, and I would like to help them just go through that process of getting to what's the most important,
Right.
but doing it visually. So I have done this in other facilitation, but I'd like to do it visually, and it would be more helpful for them.
And there's a lot of stakeholders here. There's more than 2 or 3, right? Product owners. Yes, great. So you're getting clear. We actually think getting clear on how you're going to make decisions is the second most important thing you can do in any meeting. Clearly, the first and most important thing in any meeting is to have desired outcomes. In other words, to say, have what you want to get out of the meeting clearly stated, but then deciding how you're going to decide and letting people know is the second most important thing. So we're going to move into framing this. What we're imagining balancing is ownership and involvement. And we're going to end up saying there are 5 different levels of involvement, each of which is appropriate in a given situation, and none of which is always the right way to go. So go to your page 6 in your handout, please, and you're going to look and see, who do you think should be involved in this decision? Who are the stakeholders? So what is a stakeholder? A stakeholder is anyone who is responsible for the final decision. Anyone or any group who can or is expected to implement the decision, or who could, this is a really important thing, anyone or any group who could block this great move or this great decision. We sometimes leave out the blockers at our peril. Anyone who is likely to be affected by the outcome of the decision. So sometimes there's subject matter experts. It might be necessary to include those. And it's very important, I think, to do so. So look at page 6, and I'm inviting you to do a stakeholder analysis of your own situation. Literally in the writable PDF, say, now a stakeholder can be individual, and insofar as you can, in the case that Amanda was speaking about, there's certainly a number of groups who might have a leader or might have a perspective within those tribes that she was talking about. Casey's case is really interesting. It's a different kind of a case, but there's lots of people, Casey, who are stakeholders in your making this shift. You can't quite decide yourself. You can't simply say, I want to be this. You've got to move from this project manager role into this facilitator role with support. So list them and then have a go at saying what's a win for a stakeholder. Very few stakeholders, almost no stakeholder will get everything they want. But what's a win for them really is worth considering. So take a moment again to think this through. A win is what would make it attractive to each person or each group that you're naming, including those who might be interested in blocking this great initiative. How many stakeholders have you written down there, Bruce?
I have lots of different clients. I did not narrowed into a specific case study.
Okay.
Yeah, so I have lots and none.
And how hard is it? What about a win? Give us a win for one client or one stakeholder rather.
Got it.
Say that again.
Oh, wanted verbally.
Yes, please.
That their voices are heard.
Yeah.
And acted on.
Right.
That's a big one.
That's a big one, that my voice is heard and that it's genuine, that it's really been heard, really been appreciated. Thank you. Yeah. I'm going to suggest that we, when you think about like, what are some of the factors you might have to weigh when it comes to, we do have the saying, there's no one right way to make a decision. But what are some, maybe put in chat, what do you think are making conscious choices about, we actually named 6 different factors on page 7. So open page 7 and have a quick look at the factors. Stakeholder buy-in. You're trying to hold the tension around how much can these key stakeholders be involved to confidently support the implementation that you're envisioning of the decision. Time clearly was mentioned as a significant challenge by everyone earlier when we said, what's the dilemma of involving people in decisions? Time. In general, where time is not an endless commodity. How important is this decision? I remember when as I said, I'm a lot of years with my own company, thank you. I'm in 26 years with the company. We've moved offices a number of times. We don't have any offices now because we went virtual. We became an office-less group in 2019, just before the COVID. Thanks be to goodness we did that. But I remember moving offices and being asked in 2001, and one office move, would I like an aisle or a window seat in the new office? And I had to really, the person asked me at least 6 times who was in charge of the move. And at a certain point, I had to say, listen, if I'm in this office too much, you better be worried because my job is really to be out on the road at that time. And I said, I'm pleased to have a seat, but I don't need to have so much attention. The idea of where I would sit was not important to me because I'd be seldom in the office. The information needed is a factor named on page 6. This is a really interesting one, group process capability. If we delegate, for instance, a decision to a group, do they have the capability to self-organize and make decisions? And finally, will this engagement policy of mine, of ours, will it actually build teamwork? So take a moment just to have a look at those from your own point of view. 6 factors. I'm going to briefly talk about each of these. Decide and announce is where, and these are and if you really want to, I'm not going to go through it all, but if these on page, each of these has a whole page given over to it in the little booklet that you have. Decide and announce is on page 11. But there's pluses, there's advantages and disadvantages to each. Deciding and announcing. There are moments when people are so hungry for a decision and they've been waiting for maybe a month, maybe a quarter, maybe longer. And finally someone says, okay, this is where we're headed. When is a situation when decide and announce was used successfully in your organization? Among the times that decide and announce was used successfully in recent times were for health reasons. We decided and announced that that our stores would not be allowing people in because of COVID. There was a moment where that was the appropriate level of involvement. Gather input from individuals and decision is, again, significantly different. I go and I speak to Brian, then I go to Christine and I speak to her separately. I go to Paul separately. And finally, I go to Bruce separately. And Mary, of course, and Jenny. But I go to each person separately and I come back and I say, I've asked and I've gotten the input and here's the decision. Here's how we're making it. It's a gather input from individuals and make the decision. Again, be thinking, when is this appropriate? When have you used this successfully? Or when have you been one of the ones who's been asked for their input on a one-to-one basis and felt that was sufficient? A downside of this is that sometimes when people get asked for their opinion, they think, somehow or other, they think the leader is going to do what I said, even though they've asked 5 or 6 people. I was on the board of my company in an earlier iteration, and there were 6 people on the board. The chair of the board was based in San Francisco. She would call up and say, Mary Beth was her name, what do you want on the quarterly agenda, Michael? I would say what I wanted. Then she would say, now, Michael, you're the second one I've asked, or I've got to go to the other 4. And I will then decide the agenda based on input. And I would say, that's fine, because I was happy that I had been heard and that Mary Beth was going to be, she was gathering input from the 5 of us and then making the decision. Gathering input from a group is slightly different, and by which we mean you bring the group together as a group, either virtually or in person or in a hybrid way. And you say, I want to get input from the 4 of us, from Jenny and Laura and Mary and Paul. So you're in the one space at the one time, not necessarily geographic, and I'm saying, what do you think? I'm gathering input. Then I say, thank you very much, and I go and make the decision. Again, the pluses and the use of this is significant. The pluses are that the folk feel really involved. The difference between this and the previous one, of course, is that they can feed off each other's ideas. And so even though I go into a meeting with no idea in my head as a good extrovert, once I hear Laura say something and Mary say something, of course I have an idea. The difficulty with this one, of course, it can be that the group can be split, or they can unite against me. And I may still have to go a route that is not one that was brought up by the group. Gather input from a group and make a decision. Consensus is so interesting. Consensus is everyone agrees. For some reason, we think this is the normal way of making decisions. And we would go so far as to say it's seldom the right way to go. But there's three little component pieces. Everyone agrees to support, and everyone agrees to implement. I remember doing working with a senior leadership team of a company that was based in the Boston area, and going to their meeting and coming out and meeting them coming out, and the CEO said to me, what I really dislike is making decisions in the room and people coming out, and after we've agreed, someone saying, and she gave this example, I think it was a mythical example, but last week we were talking about phones. In the meeting, everyone agreed we'd have black phones, blue, maybe blue, and as I was standing there as we exited the meeting, someone who's on my team walked up to a colleague of theirs, and the colleague said, "Were you talking about phones?" And the person said, "Yes." And the person said, "Well, you know, I have a red phone." And the person who was in my meeting, the CEO said, "You don't worry, you can go ahead," even though we decided on black phones. In other words, the consensus only lasted for the few yards that it took to leave the room, or for the 10 minutes that it took. Consensus is a difficult thing, we think, to get. We think it's very challenging. We think it's very seldom the way to go. And so we say, and I think it's a really interesting thing to say to people, go for consensus and see if you can get it in a minute, or in 5 minutes, or in an hour, or in a day, or in a week, or in a quarter. In the event of us not getting to consensus, here's the fallback. We're going to fall back to gather input from the group, a subgroup. We're going to fall back to gathering input from individuals, or we're going to fall back to Michael deciding. We could imagine falling up to delegate with constraints. This is a really interesting one to me. I think it's the level of involvement in decisions that most of us are offered. We are delegated with constraints to be leaders. You're delegated with constraints to be a scribe, to be a brilliant scribe, to be a graphic scribe, but you're not free to do whatever you like. I'm delegated with constraints to teach levels of involvement in decision making this evening. I'm teaching knowledge capital that's not my own. I didn't write this. I'm thrilled to be here with you. And I am free to do it in Michael's way, but really I'm delegated with constraints. Even the very most powerful people in most countries that are not despots are delegated with constraints politically. Even this great country of North America, of USA, is the leader of the country is delegated to run the thing for 4 years. And then they go back and they say, can I do it for another 4 years? And that's the limit. No one can do it for more than 8 years. Delegated with constraints. So the pluses, of course, are delegated with constraints is that I, as the leader, I let go. I authorize 1 or 3 folk to make the decision. That's a difficult one for me. In consensus, I'm an equal with everybody. I sit there and I stay in the process. In delegate, I let it go for all sorts of different reasons. And I have to live with it. The pluses are I have let it go. I can be doing something else. The downsides, as you'll read, are I have to live with it. And it's still, I'm still responsible for the decision. So here's the factors: stakeholder buy-in, time available, importance of decision, information needed. We've been through these. We've been through, again, I just want to say, communicating the decision-making method is really pivotal. and terribly important. Maybe you would write in chat why I would say communicating a decision-making method is important. Why is it important to communicate a decision-making method? Casey, I'm really very grateful for the constraint. What's in it and what's out? Yes, it's really helpful for a community, a department, a division, a whole company to know. So everyone has clear expectations and is able to confidently participate. Yes, Laura. Clarity around decision-making clears up so much muddy water. It allows, as Amanda says, it knows to know how I can contribute. Yeah, and Bruce, you know the guard rails or the guide rails. Yes. Thank you, Kimberly. Sometimes no one knows who's making the decision. It is such a significant step forward to begin to let people in on this little secret, because I think people secretly think if I'm involved in the decision, it's going to be consensus. Completely untrue, I think, and completely it's not a fair deduction. I'm going to say finally that each of these 5 levels is appropriate in a given situation. No one of them is always the right way to go. Each is appropriate in a given situation. No one of them is always the right way to go. So there is a case study on page 9. There's actually 2 case studies. So I want you to go into a breakout room to practice choosing a level of involvement. I'm going to be asking Brian to pair you up. So read the case study, just the first case study on page 9. And with your partner, answer the questions. What decisions need to be made? Who should be involved in making them? And what level of involvement would you choose? And why? And come back to us prepared to let us in on what you came up with.
Okay, we got the breakout set up. We'll be in there for about 10 minutes. Michael, anything else before I open up the breakouts?
No, that's it.
Okay, see you soon.
So I'm inviting you now to consider your case. Your case, you've already filled in part A, part B, and part C. And finally, of course, part D is what's the level of involvement that you think is appropriate for the decision for the communication of the decision. And then why? Why do you think this? So take a moment to think that through. And I'm going to ask Brian to pair us off in the same pairs we were in.
So 15 minutes, 7 minutes each. We'll see you soon.
Yes. Enjoy. Well, thank you and welcome back, Jenny and Paul and Amanda and Christina and Laura. So my interest, of course, is I was only in one room. Maybe I'll go with what level of involvement did you choose, Jenny? And then what's a learning for you, or what's a little bit of an aha that you had as you did this?
Okay, so I debriefed a past case, working with a company and their strategic vision and their CEO.
Yeah. And
from my perspective, it was a failed project. And why do I say that? Because after 3 months after we finished the project, the CEO was fired. But in debriefing it, I realized it was actually a very successful project. And here's why. The company had a decision to make on resource allocation for 150 projects. And they were hard. It was a medical device company. It was hard for them to make the decisions because all of the projects required high technical competence, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so the CEO wanted the leadership team to decide by consensus which projects they should go with. So instead, we gathered input from individuals, fed that into a group decision-making process, and came up with, here's the if you start with these 5 projects, then that's going to free up the maximum number of resources. So then you can cascade them on, blah, 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 blah. And the CEO would not accept it because he wanted the people in the room to agree by consensus. He said, I want these to be stacked and ranked. And Laura and I went through this case, and afterwards she said, I think it actually was a big service to the company that you went through the whole process, and it proved that he could not make the decision.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, his executive team mutinied and they had him fired.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So, but it was really interesting to me because I had never thought about, like the escalation, de-escalation, quite such as an outside objective observer of what was happening with that project. And to go back and debrief it, now I realize I have the language that I could have communicated to the whole group. Here's a different way to do this. We're not going to rank them and stack them. We're not going to do 80-20. We're not going to do any of the things that you guys have tried 3 times previously with 3 other CEOs. Yeah. I mean, it was a really dysfunctional organization, but it was fun. And I learned a lot. And today I actually feel good about how it all turned out. So thank you, Michael.
And again, thinking it through, he might have decided and announced, but he wouldn't have done it without getting input from the group, for instance. Maybe not the whole group, but he could have. He would have been. He was a he.
He would have
been
5 business
advised
units.
to maybe get input from individuals, but maybe get input from a level down, even. Not just the senior leadership team. So that he checks, am I getting it? Am I hearing it properly? Christina, who are you with?
So I was with Amanda and Paul, given that I didn't have a partner for the first part of it. So I was bringing in the ideas that I had too. Given that I spent the last 17 years in the Defence Force, I had a slightly different view. Because it struck me that the case 1 was more like a war room and how you might stack that up in order to respond to something. But then I also wondered just what their market share was and whether they thought it was a big problem or a small problem. Jenny, what you were talking about, one of the things that I was wondering about was the values of the organization and all of the things that they had to do, which one of those matched their values, which would actually allow them to make many decisions. These things fit our values and the thing that we make most impact with. And I often spend a lot of time thinking about different organizations and companies. What are your values and where are you headed? Because sometimes those values that you hold are how you make your decisions. And they don't require consensus because the values are the way that the organization is living its life. But that's another one as well. So yeah, so we spent most of our time kind of like bringing together our ideas on case 1, and we were very much aligned. It was just that we used slightly different words.
Okay. And meaning a case 1 being the one that you had wrestled with a little earlier. Yeah. Good. Okay. Yeah, it is a fascinating case, I think. Yes. And what did you end up choosing? The product manager for the pharmaceutical company. What did you choose?
Actually, Amanda's probably got more of the detail. I mean, I was looking very much at the structure of how we might do this based on how I'd seen other things done. And yes, so Amanda, is there anything that you want to
add? Michael, thank you, Christina. Michael, I think what I was trying to do is just get some kind of a structure, not specifically use the case as itself. But basically just have a recipe or a pattern of how we would approach it. And that's what Christina was alluding to, that, you would set up a war room, you would validate if this rumor was even true, validate anything first before you even start on anything. Then going to a current state, whether that was market share or whatever that is, bring the data in, and then people's input into this, so their level of engagement would be to bring their own skills. And then, so the consensus we would ask them at that point is just on what is important. And we'd give them specific categories, because otherwise you'd go really wide. So we'd give them guardrails. And then we'd go away and validate it by wider SMEs so it's a two-part, and maybe get input from levels down in specific areas. Then back together, and what the level of decision they would have is on how to do things. So they would put maybe together 3 proposals.
Yes.
And then also alluding to the fact that there is some other person that has the final say, and that person usually with the purse strings. And they might even also decide, do we need to respond?
Yes.
But we bring together those 3 proposals, and yes, it's a little bit of a back and forth iterative ways of working, and they can say, yes, I like that part, come back with a final, and then that's the plan of action. So everybody was heard from bottom up, and then just it feels collaborative. It feels that also as the facilitator, you might also take other things that they bring to the table and park it. You don't always have to use it, but the voices were heard throughout the process. That was what we came up with.
Yeah, beautifully. I mean, that's a beautiful point, I think, really powerful point, that it's very seldom one level of involvement is chosen for the whole project. So, and it's like an accordion, I think. You've got to imagine that we'll go out, we'll do research on the competitors. If we'll find out if that's real, and we'll bring back that information. We'll share it. There'll be a conversation around that. It'll shape then the next move almost of involvement. I mean, the really big idea here is people are hungry to be owning their own decisions. And this is an outrageous thing to say, and I didn't make this up, but I heard someone else in my company say it, and I think it's terrific, but very few parents call their own child ugly. You know, and so when it comes to decision making, if you parent the decision at some level, you're less likely to call it out and say it's foolish or stupid, or in other words, if I'm involved in the co-creation of an idea, I have upped my ownership of it. How did I get there? I got there by being allowed to increase my involvement in the co-creation of it. And so it's not the perfect decision by any means, but I still am prepared to incorporate it. I'm prepared to I think the 3 things around consensus are: everyone agrees to support. Not that hard sometimes, but everyone agrees to implement. Very hard, almost impossible. And that's why I think consensus is seldom the way to go. You can get it if you say, we're staying here until 7:30 tonight to get this, or else we'll go at 7:30 if we get consensus. Well, lo and behold, you'll get consensus. You know, like, we're going to stay until Friday. It's 6 o'clock on the Friday, and we're going to stay until we get consensus. Well, you'll probably get whatever you want, but it won't be worth the paper that the scribe wrote it on. You know, the Nova scribe may not have quite earned their shilling that day. So again, I'm going to stop us here. I have to say, Casey, you've done an extraordinary job of writing things in the chat. Paul, I want to thank you for what you're doing, and I'm wondering, will we see it, or it'll be part of the report of the meeting? Is it? Oh, Paul's charts, yeah.
Can we see it, Paul?
It's not done yet. I'll have it done in less than an hour.
All right, cool.
Okay. I'm conscious of not going over the time on a Tuesday night, early in April. And I know I just review what we did. We said inviting people into a decision has pluses and minuses. Usually it increases the ideas. Usually it encourages engagement. Downside is you might get too many ideas, but if you want to seek the maximum appropriate involvement, resolves the leader's dilemma by making it possible to increase the involvement without losing control. Then we gave 5 different levels of involvement. Each is appropriate in a given situation. We applied it to a case, and then we said, try and begin to apply this in your own life. Use it with your own groups, and you're going to find that making it visible by saying, in this meeting, we're going to use delegate with constraints, or in this meeting, we're going to go for consensus with a fallback. Always have a fallback. If you go for consensus, don't say, like, we're going to go for consensus if we can get it in an hour, in a day, in a week. In the event of us not getting to consensus, Brian is going to decide. It's so liberating for people. You know, it's really genuinely liberating. But I want to leave you with that. You can have of course, delegate. You can fall back from consensus, could be fall up to delegate with constraints. Thank you for this. I maybe do a little plus delta to end. We usually say what worked about this, plus delta is how would this be improved? So go into chat, please. Delta is not a minus. It's my recommendation to improve this, Michael, would be, but give us, just write as many pluses as you like and as many deltas as you like, and it'll become part of what I will receive from you. So take a moment just to write one thought in the chat. What did you appreciate about this? Or I like that. And what my suggestion for an upgrade is, I think you might do better than Michael if you did X or Y.
While you're doing that, let's go ahead and give Michael a big Nova Scribes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael. It was awesome. And I sure hope you will consider coming back. And let's do this again sometime. And with that, I am going to go ahead and stop the recording.
I would be delighted to come back.